Now, international brewers like Diageo, Heineken, and more recently South Africa's SABMiller are jostling for the Nigerian beer market to better understand the industry dynamics and opportunities offered by Africa's most populous nation. I now speak with Ifeoma Okoli, an analyst with ARM Investment Managers. Ifeoma, thank you so much for joining us. And I want to first of all start by getting your thoughts on how the industry has changed. We've seen quite some dynamism, particularly with the entry of SABMiller over the last few years. They've brought up quite a few breweries. They've set up some greenfield projects. So how has the competitive space changed in your view?
For the brewery sector, it's actually been quite competitive. You've had like two major players in that space for quite some time, and then SABMiller coming in, but primarily focusing on the economy segment of that market. And I think that has also, fueled the interest of these other two players into going into that particular space. Before now, we hadn't really seen Nigerian breweries or Guinness, try to penetrate that space, but at least I think with SABMiller coming, targeting that market, we've seen increased interest. And aside that, I think with the pressures that happened last year, and volumes declining, I think it actually brought to light the need, to be able to spread your market share, right, and not just focus on one particular segment, but right, diversify your portfolio to be able to meet the needs of the varying categories of customers you have, right, in the marketplace.
Okay, so some pressure last year, like you did mention, consumer spending power right now. How do you rate that? And I want to get your thoughts on particularly if you like, the established players, Guinness, of course, a subsidiary of Diageo, and the Nigerian breweries, the subsidiary of Heineken. Those companies in particular going into that, as you described it, economic class or economic market in Nigeria. Your thoughts about the potential for many of them to continue to expand in that space?
I think there's a lot of potential in that market, even for the beer market as a whole. At least I think as at last year, we estimated per capita beer consumption at about 11 liters, and that's quite low when you compare that with South Africa. I think they have about 60 liters, and then Cameroon at about 25, and the population size of those countries are really, really smaller than that of Nigeria. And I think the interesting thing to look at, actually, especially from reports coming from the World Health Organization, is that alcohol consumption in Nigeria is actually higher, than consumption in those countries. But I think the difference is the contribution of beer, to beer consumption to total alcohol consumption is higher in those other market space compared to Nigeria. And with Nigeria, you have a lot of that consumption going into, into local brews, and I think that's an indication that there's a lot of potential, for production or for production in that space. Right. And so I think it's a large market, and there's a lot of potential. Demographics supports that. About over 52% of the population is within the drinking age.
SABMiller has made the play for the lower segment of the market. When they were coming in, I think there were concerns as to whether or not they would be able to play with the big boys, if you like, in terms of Diageo and Heineken's overwhelming dominance of this market. Do you think we'll ever see a time where the likes of SABMiller could challenge and eat significant market share of those two players?
Well, I think what we have to try to understand is that there are two markets, and then for SABMiller, rather, right now, I think the primary focus is in the economy segment, where they're actually dominating, and not in the premium or mainstream segment. And
but they do have premium brands, so they could introduce them into the market.
Yes, they could. But for now, Nigerian breweries and Guinness actually have a stronghold, and I think before we see SABMiller really pose a threat to the two top players in that space, it's going to take a while.
And it's even more difficult now because we've had the likes of Nigerian breweries coming on an acquisition spree over the last few years. So all the breweries that were available that could help in driving some inorganic growth are more or less taken away now.
Exactly. So it's just going to be organic growth all through. And even with Guinness, we see that happening with Guinness. Guinness actually, chose to expand itself, its capacity organically, and they're still expanding capacity. At least at the last discussion, they said they had earmarked about 80 to 90 million pounds for capital expenditure within the next 12 to 18 months. And so it's I think totally or generally it just points to the fact that they believe in the market, the Nigerian beer market. It's a large market. It has lots of potential, and just positioning themselves to take advantage once the market picks up, which we expect at least somewhat moderately this year.